Hello and welcome to Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui in Beijing. Conventional wisdom says that the world is getting smaller. Thanks to advances in transportation, energy, and communications, people all over the world are connected to each other like never before. Previously isolated nations are now accessible to the outside world, and nations' economies are now dependent on those of other nations. What does this connectivity mean for the future? Do lines on the map still matter? Will wars be fought more over supply chains than territory? And what are the solutions for them? To discuss all these issues today, I'm very happy to be joined here by Mr. Parag Khanna, author of Connectography, Mapping the Future of Global Civilization. But before we start the interview, let's look at this.
Born in India, Parag Khanna is a CNN Global contributor and Senior Research Fellow at the Center on Asia and Globalization at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy in Singapore. Khanna has been an advisor to the US National Intelligence Council's Global Trends 2030 program and served in the Foreign Policy Advisory Group to the Barack Obama for President campaign. From 2006 to 2015, he was a Senior Research Fellow at the New America Foundation. In 2008, Khanna was named one of Esquire's 75 most influential people of the 21st century and featured in Wired magazine's Smart List. Khanna's first book was called The Second World: Empires and Influence in the New Global Order. It was an international bestseller and translated into more than 20 languages. The book was serialized as a cover story for the New York Times magazine titled Waving Goodbye to Hegemony. Khanna is also author of How to Run the World, Charting a Course to the Next Renaissance. A completion of his trilogy on world order was published in April 2016. Titled Connectography, Mapping the Future of Global Civilization, the book argues that global transportation, energy and communications infrastructures and the supply chains they facilitate, particularly among megacities, are forging a global network civilization with complex power dynamics.
Welcome to Dialogue, sir.
Thank you.
Can you enlighten our audience with a clear definition about connectography?
Connectography is the fusion of geography and connectivity. And what is connectivity? It is infrastructure. It is transportation, energy, and communications networks. They are a new kind of permanent geography that is not yet on our maps, but it is my mission to put it on the maps. We have maps of natural geography, of natural resources, of forests, of oceans, of deserts. We have maps of political geography, which is how we legally divide the world. We do not have maps of functional geography, which is how do we as mankind actually use the world. And connectography is mapping that infrastructural reality, those millions of kilometers of networks that connect us all.
The opening remarks illustrate clearly the geopolitical implications of connectography, and therefore President Xi Jinping's idea about the Belt and Road Initiative, which is meant to be very inclusive geopolitically, might be a threat to the United States. Don't you think the United States would find it very difficult to accept this blueprint by the Chinese government?
The most important thing is to understand that One Belt, One Road, which I talk about a lot in the book, is part of this global infrastructure network, particularly on the Eurasian landmass. China has more neighbors than any country in the world, 14 neighbors. Do you want to fight a war with any of your neighbors? No. But you do want to optimize their resources. You do want to access Europe. You do want the Eurasian continent to come together. And One Belt, One Road is helping to sponsor that, to finance it, and to build it. And Europe wants to do it, the countries in between want to do it, and China wants to do it. So that's the number one most important thing, is that it is, in fact, inclusive geopolitics. And it is creating all of these new corridors on the map that will enrich and create development. So I have been a supporter of this. I have been traveling in the Central Asian, former Soviet republics for 15 years, and I have seen the enormous need for these initiatives. The United States' initial response to this was to fear that this institution is not operating within the traditional network of Western-led multilateral organizations. But that said, it is delivering the global public good of infrastructure. Infrastructure is as important for the world and for peace and for development as security is. And China has made a statement that China is the largest provider of infrastructure in the world. And AIIB is one way in which it will do that. And therefore, it is something that actually the United States should support. When I'm in Washington, I argue that they should, in fact, support the One Belt, One Road.
We have both the physical infrastructure and also the telecommunication infrastructure, and both would be very helpful in assisting your idea about promoting the supply chains. However, problems occur. We'll take a second look at what's happening in continental Europe. The problem with the European Union is that the traditional borders are eliminated with the Schengen Agreement to help a free movement of people, goods, services, money, whatever you mention it. But then the asylum seekers from the volatile region of the Middle East due to the US-led invasion has contributed a lot to the political instability. Politicians start to give a second thought to this idea of connectivity. What do you think of the consequences arising from the reconfiguration of the infrastructure?
We are looking at the Brexit as if it will be a giant wall in the sea between Britain and France and Europe. It will not be anything of the sort. In fact, it is simply a way of asserting a little bit more control and autonomy over a particular kind of migration flow. That is what this is about. And of course, the challenge is accelerated because of all the migration coming in. The same infrastructures that Europe built in the 1990s to help to stabilize Eastern Europe, the Warsaw Pact countries, the former Soviet republics that were poor, that were broken, that needed to reform. It invested in their highways, in their tunnels, in their railways, in their buildings, in their political institutions. It elevated them and made them part of the EU. Now, those same trains, those same highways, those same roads are being used by migrants to rapidly enter Europe. The same infrastructures that enable connectivity and flows and integration.
But then we have the clashes of civilization.
No, it is not a clash of civilization. I do not believe in any such
thing.
For
example, leadership in Northern Europe or in Central and Eastern Europe are very reluctant to accept the asylum seekers because they believe in Christianity, and Christianity is likely to clash with Islamic beliefs, and therefore the electorate there in the Northern European countries, in Eastern European countries, would reject immigration, and this would of course cause a crisis among or between member states when it comes to the future of the European Union.
You could not expect all European countries to act the same way. I spend a lot of time in Germany. It's the largest, wealthiest country in Europe. They have been very open to immigrants. They have taken in 1 million migrants in the last couple of years. Other countries are much smaller. You cannot expect Sweden or Finland, which have populations of less than 10 million people, to accept the same number or the same proportion even of migrants. Their political, cultural systems are different. Their ability to absorb is different. We have to treat the countries based on their capacity. One thing that all European countries could do better is assimilation. The truth is that most migrants are neither Islamist fundamentalists, they are normal human beings, they are economic migrants. There are more than 300 million economic migrants in the world today, and a small number of them happen to be Arabs and Africans in Europe. Most of them are adjusting. They are hardworking people.
But I'm afraid that more observers are very skeptical about your proposal. Taking Germany as an example, Chancellor Angela Merkel was indeed given the honor of Woman of the Year by the Time magazine, but her political decision, which was proved very unpopular with the electorate in her country, did create a lot of instability, and the approval rating of CDU, the Christian Democratic Union, dropped significantly. So in terms of domestic politics, she has paid a heavy price despite her vision and guts. What do you think of the reluctance of other politicians in other countries who may not act likewise?
I do not represent the view that all borders should be open and that there should be unlimited migration of political refugees and environmental refugees and asylum seekers from all over the world flooding into Europe and destabilizing its societies. That is not the view that I represent. I do represent the view that, in fact, European countries have among the lowest or negative fertility rates in the world.
Now,
they have a very significant need for migration.
I raised this question because you mentioned the word assimilation.
Yes.
What German government did was exactly an attempt at assimilation, but other countries may reluctantly accept this.
Some, but not all. France knows that it needs to do a better job of assimilation. You have to remember
but France is the biggest victim of Islamic extremists.
If you were to stop new immigration in tomorrow, you would still need to integrate millions of migrants who are already there. Assimilation is necessary even if you change the migration policy and block all new migrants, because the percentage of foreign-born people in these countries is already not 1% or 2%, it's 15% or 20%. So they must learn to do assimilation anyway, whether it is for people who are already there or for new people coming in.
But consequentially, European Union is likely to fall apart, and more countries are likely to vote for leave.
I have heard a lot of people say this, but it's actually not true. It is true that the European Union is very unpopular as an institution in countries. And it is also true that national political leaders manipulate the public opinion in order to blame Europe for their own failures. That is not uncommon in any country in the world.
This is very debatable. By the way, let's come back to examine what's going to happen in the Euro-Asian mass or continent here. The SCO, the role the SCO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, plays in putting nations, whatever their level of economic development, together for the single purpose of consensus building or poverty alleviation. Let's look at Afghanistan. Do you think China's investment along with India would help alleviate the poverty and facilitate the process of a post-war reconstruction?
Yes, and it will certainly do a better job than the last 15 years of the American occupation. And as you know, I served in the US military and I was there in Afghanistan, and I'm very disappointed that the major...
Congratulations on your survival of the war there.
Thank you. I think other people took even greater risks than me, so they deserve a lot more credit. But in all seriousness, what I've documented in this book are the major infrastructure corridors that Afghanistan needs as a landlocked country to be connected to the Arabian Sea and to be connected to other markets. The United States manifestly failed to resurrect those infrastructures. The argument of my book is that you must do city building and infrastructure building if you want to have long-lasting state building. You can talk about democracy, you can talk about institutions, you can talk about political processes, but if you do not have a functional, physical state apparatus and infrastructure for the people to be mobile, to be commercial, the state will fail. Now, I think your question is very valid because it is ultimately Pakistan and China and India and the other former Soviet republics of the region who are proximate to Afghanistan, who have taken it on as a long-term project to make it a Silk Road roundabout, to build the ring road, to build the railways, to access the natural resources, to connect it to markets. Will that be better in the next 15 years? Will it achieve more in the next 15 years than the United States did in the last 15 years? Yes, it will. I absolutely believe it will. And the SCO is part of it. Pakistan and Afghanistan just joined the SCO. Afghanistan and Iran also are going to be joining. Even Turkey has applied to join. And of course, all of these countries are part of the AIIB as well.
Perhaps you have drawn us a little bit too rosy picture about the interconnectivity and underestimated the risks of political stability there. Pakistan, for example, where we're going to construct the China-Pakistan economic corridor. The Pakistani government has agreed to provide the Chinese workers with security forces to protect their job there. But the same is true with our investment environment in Afghanistan, where the militias and the warlords, particularly the threat from the Taliban, might be a serious concern for the Chinese.
Since I have spent a lot of time in Afghanistan and Pakistan, I never underestimate this risk, the security risk, and therefore I am definitely not painting a rosy scenario. I think it will be ugly, and I think that it will be very challenging as the environment. And I think
what are the major challenges to the idea of interconnectivity or connectography?
Well, if you want to talk just first and foremost about the very turbulent Central Asian region, the first challenge is geography itself, because it is a very imposing and difficult geography. The Wakhan corridor that connects China to Afghanistan is a very perilous geography, and it's very difficult to deliver a water supply, electricity, anything, telecommunications. Chinese companies operating there will face some of the same challenges that Americans or Europeans have. There will be threats to physical security, but in the long run, China has the interest to be the largest investor in Afghanistan, to maximize the resources of its neighbors, and there will be consequences, there will be human suffering, there will be terrorist attacks. These things happen everywhere. This has already happened to Chinese workers in Zambia, in Angola, in Nigeria, in Myanmar, and in Pakistan. So it's not new, in fact. These are things that you as an empire actually will experience, as other empires have.
Thank you very much. You're watching Dialogue with Mr. Parag Khanna. He is discussing with me about the idea of a connectography. And when we come back, we'll discuss whether hyperconnected megacities are changing the world map. So stay with us. Welcome back. Let's first of all take a look at the South China Sea, where geopolitical clashes are likely to take place because of the pivot to Asia and the alleged assertiveness of the Chinese Navy there, although China says over and over that we established the business and military presence there to protect public services and public goods, such as ensuring the freedom of navigation and overflight, but we are not trusted. I don't know why. What do you think of your theory and the application of your theory in ensuring the supply chain and the possible geopolitical rivalry between the two biggest economies in the world, the United States and China?
I am less concerned with who provides the freedom of navigation and the openness of the seas than that it is genuinely provided. If China is building the military infrastructures on these islands and reefs in the South China Sea, in the Spratly chain and the Paracel chain, and it is genuinely maintaining openness and safety and counter piracy and also navigational support and assistance, that is a good thing. Someone should always provide it, whether it is America or Japan or China, is actually secondary. From the perspective of the 50% of global maritime traffic that is transiting these waters, they are less concerned with who is providing these goods than that they are provided. So I hope that China will in fact provide these goods on a consistent long-term basis. After all, these are waters that are very close to your shores. I worry about the conflict as much as you do, because I do not like to see that every single instance of two ships clashing or fishermen being arrested results in an escalation that could become war. I would like to see mature diplomatic institutions in the region, which do not exist yet. We have many organizations, but they are not mature enough to keep these disputes under control. The one thing that I believe will solve this conflict, or potential conflict, is if the national energy companies, the oil and gas exploration companies of Vietnam, Philippines, Indonesia, China, and so forth, were to create a common body that is overseeing the exploitation of the mineral deposits, of the natural gas, of the fisheries, and to serve the open market and to share the profits from that. Because you will not have a legal resolution anytime soon, as you know. But
yes,
you can have commercial cooperation.
China tries very hard to work together with other claimants in the South China Sea to work out a code of conduct based on the DOC. Having said this, let's look at the idea of megacities. Why do you think that megacities are so important instead of nation states? That would be very surprising for those experts of international studies who have long used the discourse of a Westphalian world order to highlight their understanding about the geopolitical and geo-economic order.
It's a pity that many scholars today are trapped in a legalist Westphalian prism around the foundational units of the international system, because the Treaty of Westphalia dates to 1648, but in fact legal equality among countries has been a fiction ever since then. Only in the 20th century did European empires actually become dismantled. So even in a Westphalian world, we lived in a world of great hierarchy of empires. Only since 1945 have we actually had a world of sovereign, equal, legal states. And even then, as we know, Afghanistan and Libya and Iraq are not the same as China and Germany and America. So we have many layers and types of units in the world, and we always have. The city has been there for 5,000 years. Empires rise and fall. Rome is still there. Istanbul is still there. Nations come and go. Iraq will barely make it to the age of 60 or 70, right? Most Arab countries will not live to be 100. But cities have been there for 5,000 years, like Baghdad, like Cairo. So I talk about the rise of megacities because we have always had and will always have the city. But what is different today is that the megacities, the 50 or 60 megacities, and more than 12 of them are right here in China, are so much larger and more powerful than the countries around them in many cases. So for example, Lagos, Nigeria, is the most important city in all of West Africa. It is not only the commercial capital of Nigeria, it is the anchor for the entire geography of West Africa. The same is true for Nairobi in East Africa.
And perhaps Johannesburg.
And Johannesburg in Sub-Saharan Africa. What China is doing correct is that it is a strong state, it is an ancient civilization, but it is also organizing itself into these connected cities, each of which is very internally robust and becoming more wealthy and is also internationally connected. The more connected Chinese cities become, the more powerful China as a whole becomes. You have created a synergy between the city and the state and the empire.
The younger generation would of course prefer to go to the first and second tier cities in China, for example. However, don't you think enormous pressure is likely to be created upon the environment and the use of energy?
Yes.
So to such a degree where local authorities in China would find it very difficult to come to terms with finding an effective solution.
Right. That is already the case today. That is not a prognosis for the future. We see the air inequality in China. We know that there is stress on the infrastructure. We know that people are migrating to cities, but they're not yet clear what the economic activity is there for them. There is a lot of dislocation. There is a lot of environmental stress. China now can afford to invest in the high quality infrastructures and technologies and mechanisms and policies that will reduce usage of coal in factories, that will have lower emissions from buildings, that will have less traffic and congestion in the streets. They are seeing experiments in China today where they are reducing the amount of cars on the streets and all of these kinds of things. In the course of modernizing and applying new technologies to the situation, China will get greener over time. Of course, there has been a tremendous cost, but I think that that is what has taught China to invest faster in these solutions that are there.
We've been talking about the investment as well as environmental protection. What about the invisible benefits or consequences? For example, today we were discussing why there are so many people in the streets of London who do not look like whites. They are immigrants from Africa and from other parts of the world. But in China, in almost all of the major cities, you seldom see people like you, foreigners. Mm-hmm. So the spirit of a cosmopolitan city, so the issue of having spirit of a cosmopolitan city may come across as yet another topic for wide discussions.
Yes. All of the great global cities in history, the imperial capitals, whether it is Rome, whether it is Amsterdam, whether it is London, New York, today places like Hong Kong and Singapore, they have very high percentage of foreign-born people because they embrace diversity and openness. That is the view that cities have. In London, people are opposed to the Brexit. Nationwide in Britain, it is 50-50, right? But people in London overwhelmingly want to remain open and connected. I do believe that China is quite open in the sense that it is easier for people to travel here. More people are coming here to learn Mandarin and to work. You see a greater diversity in the streets of Shanghai, most certainly, and even in southern Chinese cities. But of course, China's population is the largest in the world. So you are not likely to have more than 1% of the Chinese population be foreign, simply because the population is very big. But that said, there are, of course, in terms of the actual number of foreigners here, a very large and growing number of people.
The last question, Parag, is very much about what former Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel said about your book. He says your book is a must-read for the next president. So, if Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton takes office, what would be your advice?
Well, I think that it will probably be President Clinton, but either way, my advice is the same. Because in geopolitics, you think about the structure. You don't worry about the individual person. So my advice is the same for any president. And that is as follows. First of all, invest in infrastructure. And in fact, that is the one thing that they both agree on. They both say that if elected, they will invest in rebuilding America. In terms of foreign policy, I think there are 4 things that America can do to leverage its connectivity to the world for positive purposes. The first is energy. The United States now sells oil to China. 10 years ago, we feared that the United States and China might fight a war over oil resources. Instead, China has an energy security strategy that includes buying oil from America. That is a good thing. It is better to have America as the world's largest reliable supplier of oil than Russia or Saudi Arabia. It's very good for China. The second is finance, right? The American liquidity, the role of the American dollar in global monetary policy needs to be stable, needs to be predictable. This world needs liquidity in order to finance the growth and the infrastructure investment. That's very important also. Technology. American technology companies and their products are coveted around the world, hardware and software. But of course, there's a big debate about to what extent can they be accessed by security services and so forth. If the United States can be transparent about providing these low-cost technologies that improve productivity and quality of life to the world, that will make the world very happy, of course. And finally, trade, of course. Trade openness is extremely important. Right now, both candidates are against the Trans-Pacific Partnership. That is too bad. They fail to understand something that President Obama has actually made very clear. When you invest abroad and you create jobs abroad and you stimulate development abroad, those people become wealthier and then they can become consumers of your goods and trade more with you. It is actually that simple. And I find it quite sad that the candidates have backed away from that.
By the way, the first contract that we signed with the Americans about building a high-speed railway has recently been vetoed by the local political force for whatever reason. But thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
I do benefit a lot from this dialogue. Thank you very much.